One of the biggest pieces of scrap I have in the workshop is this piece of butcher block. About a year ago, I did a cabinet project in my laundry room and I used about half of this. So what I figured would be a really good project for this is to make a small side cabinet and use this as the surface. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the cabinet body out of some red oak, and then we will use the butcher block here for the top. Since we're going to start on the body of the cabinet, we're going to put the butcher block away for right now, and we'll cut it down to its final dimensions once we have the body of the cabinet built. So we're going to start with some red oak 2x2s. Now I've got these 6-foot pieces of 2x2 red oak, and we're going to cut them down to about 30 inches. So that'll give us a good kind of waist height cabinet. Okay, we are back in the workshop and we've got the legs all cut. The next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to make some panels to go between the legs, and we're going to make that out of some 1/2-inch plywood. I decided to go with 1/2 inch over 3/4, just to kind of keep the weight down a little bit on this cabinet. So since the legs are going to be made out of solid oak 2x2s, the butcher block top, anywhere I can find to reduce the weight just the littlest amount, especially for moving a piece like this, is probably for the better. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the track saw and we're going to cut out 2 8-inch pieces on this plywood panel, and that will be the side panels for our cabinet. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut out some custom trim using this 1x2 in 1/2 inch to do kind of like a frame around the inside here. So that'll kind of provide a picture frame type window on this. Okay, we've got our kind of pictures windowed out. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take some of this decorative trim and we are going to fit it to the insides of this. So this will really give this a nice piece of design. Okay, we've got all of it cut and fitted, and this really makes these side pieces pop. So we've got one all finished. Let's do the other one here, and then we can start working on some light sanding and assembly of each of the sides. So the next thing we're going to do here is we're actually going to taper these legs so they're not so chunky. And I made a test piece here, and I really like this angle. I did 2 kind of angles on here. I did one more shallow angle and then a deeper angle. And I like the deeper angle better. I think it'll fit this piece much better. So I'm going to use this as a template to trace this out and then use the track saw and cut these tapers. So we've got all the tapers cut, and I'd have to say it looks really, really good. The next step we're going to do is we're going to use the router, and we're just going to knock off this really sharp edge on the insides here. And then when we're done with the router, we're actually going to take all these loose-fitting pieces off and use the pocket hole jig to attach the legs to this panel with some pocket hole screws. So now what we're going to do do is we're going to apply some glue and pocket hole screws to attach our plywood panel to our legs. And we're going to do this for both sets. All right, so I've got the side panels out of the clamps. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to attach the rails so we can attach both of these together. Now I've cut out some 1x2s, and these have a bit of a sharp edge on them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the router here and then cut off some of the edge on here so it's a little smoother. What we're going to do now is we're going to drill some pocket holes into each of these rails. I've already started on a couple of them, and then we will attach them to the cabinet body. Now that we have the cabinet body assembled, we can start gluing on the trim. We're going to start with the 1x2s. We're going to apply some glue and then brad nail these in. Once those are in, we're going to put the decorative trim in, and then we're going to use the pin nailer to attach those. So what we're going to do next is we're going to plug these pocket hole screws with some oak plugs. So the next thing we're going to do here is we have the shelf pin jig set up in the cabinet, and we're going to drill some holes for some shelf pins, as we are going to have an adjustable shelf on the inside here. Now that we have the shelf pins drilled and the pocket holes plugged, we're going to cut out a piece for the base of the cabinet out of some 1/2-inch ply using the track saw. Additionally, since we have the track saw out, we're going to cut the back panel for the cabinet out of some 1/4-inch beadboard. Since we've also got the final dimensions for the cabinet, we can cut the butcher block top using the track saw as well. Using the trim router, we're going to take several passes on 3 sides of the butcher block to create a 45-degree chamfer. This will be a great design feature for the bottom of the top. Next, we're going to flip the butcher block over, and we're going to use a round over bit on the router to give the top a smooth round over. Next, we're going to get started on the doors for the cabinet. So first, we're going to cut some 1x3s on the miter saw for the rails and the stiles. To cut the rails and the stiles, we're going to use a cabinetry bit on the router table. First, we're going to cut the side pieces for the rails. We're going to use a sacrificial piece on our miter gauge here to prevent any tear out. Next, we're going to cut the stiles. We've got a router bit in here specifically to cut these with a decorative pattern on here. One thing I noticed while cutting on here is this created a lot of dust. I think next time I'm going to hook up my dust extractor to the router table for this section of cutting. To finish our doors, we're going to go back to the rails, and we're going to use the same router bit we cut the stiles with to cut a decorative pattern on the front of the rails. This will complete the entire door with a nice decorative pattern, and everything should fit together smoothly. What we're going to do now is we're going to use the track saw to cut out the floating panels for each of the doors out of the remaining piece of beadboard. Okay, what we're going to start doing is some assembly of the entire cabinet, and we're going to start with the door pieces here. So we've got our floating panel, and we've got our rails and our stiles. So these will all just fit together. So we slide our rails into our stiles, take our floating panel, drop it in, and we can just slide this all the way through, and there we go, one of our doors. Now with everything cut, we can assemble into a dry fit of the completed cabinet. Well, we've got the cabinet all dry fitted and roughly assembled. I think it turned out incredibly well. And again, just out of a piece of scrap butcher block I had laying around and some simple red oak pieces from the lumberyard. We've got a long ways to go still on this project. We still have to apply the hardware, sand it, and then the final finishes. So that'll be in a future video. But if you like this video, click like and subscribe for more videos. It really helps the channel grow. And in a future video, you'll be able to see the next stages of this cabinet build. Thank you.